Hello and welcome back to the Handstandcast with me, Emmett Lewis, and my co-host Mikael Christiansen. How's things, Mikael?
Yeah, could be worse. Definitely could be worse.
On a scale of 1 to fucked, how is this current environment treating you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well actually. It's sunny. It's Sweden and it's sunny. That's pretty ridiculous. So yeah.
We're currently, if you're listening to this sometime in the future, we're still in the midst of the Rona outbreak, and Ireland's having a heat wave at the moment as well. And
oh wow.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think people they started to ease the restrictions, and then they're just everyone's like, oh, they're easing the restrictions.
Yeah, let's do whatever we want. Yeah, that's basically the case here too. It's interesting. I'm not sure how it's going to develop. Sweden doesn't seem to have peaked yet either. So who knows? Who knows?
The YOLO way to containing the corona.
Yes. So what are we talking about today, Emmett?
We are going to talk about the one-arm handstand.
Oh no!
I know this is probably one of these ones where we're going to have to do a few episodes on to cover everything, but I suppose we'll start rambling and get onto it.
I mean, we need to start it sometime. So
it's a long project. It's very
I mean, I think there is. Obviously, there's more to say about that than any other given balance. I would say, since like everything before it is like substantially more simple, and everything or not everything, but most things after it too, kind of like when you can stand on one arm pretty well, like a lot of cues for like complex positions is basically stand on one arm and then do this with your body, and the do this with your body part, though hard to learn, isn't that complex, but the actual process of this going from one arm, or like from two arms to a one arm, learning that step is just like, it's just another world. It's not even comparable.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things I notice with my students and everything. It's like you'll have someone who's perfectly prepared, like very good two arms, very good presses and everything, and there's just like a learning process you have to put them through to actually get the one arm. And it's an immense amount of like persistent suffering is the only way I can describe it. Like, you have the conditioning, you have all that, you can build that up as a kind of, carrot, and then the stick is just like you just have to stand on one hand. And I can like what I always say to my student, it's called the abyss. It's like I can lead you to the abyss, to the side of the cliff, and then you set the person up with the most, say they have textbook form, the best form possible for their body type. Shoulder position is great, strength is great, flexibility is great, and then you just have to push them over the edge of the abyss and go climb out. And the only way to climb out is to just suffer through 20,000 attempted holds while your body figures out how to do the balance on one arm.
Yeah, that's actually that's not too bad of an analogy actually. Like it's it's funny with that, because I guess the one arm is how to say, it's definitely the one of everything up until that point that requires the most amount of kind of conditioning and technique and so on. But it's also where you'll see, or at least I've experienced myself due to my background of breakdancing and other people with like acrobatic experience, like that seems to be kind of the largest correlating factor about like regarding whether you learn it really fast or not. Like, as you said, like I've also trained people that have like all of the kind of setups and everything just looks great up until that like very last moment where you need to kind of orient yourself in space around this one hand, and then everything just goes to garbage. And that of course happens to most people, but I know a lot of people who just like ended up like they just kind of have that feeling very early on, simply because what I think is that the general spatial awareness from all of these other things kind of matter, or like not more, but matter at least like a substantial amount.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of these things we've been talking, me and Mikael obviously talk a lot, and I've been thinking about this, and I've been like, replicating, if we look at, say, Derek and the other guy in Stockholm who they're teeterboard flyers, and they learned one arms ridiculously quick to a very high degree.
Yeah, Andreas, he exactly. Yeah, he learned it just like that, and he was just the best almost. So
and it made me think just back on some other case examples of people who learned one arms very quickly, and a lot of them like came from a tumbling background, like gymnastics, like even just recreational gymnastics, but they're pretty good tumblers. So it's made me think on my own training now with my own students, I'm going to start implementing some kind of twisting air sense training with them in some kind of structured manner to see if there's I'm going to have a couple of control groups and have like some of those do just basic jumping, twisting, and see if there anything to it in this rotational control.
I remember, of course, like coming from breaking and seeing as I myself learned one arm through just not even training, just like fiddling around with trying a couple of times per practice, and then like slowly but surely it ended up going somewhere. And like, of course, like breakers are kind of a unique category, since like kind of hand hops, just jumping on one arm, and air babies and all of those kind of freezes they do are like just relevant to being on one arm. So like as you see, like with most b-boys, they have like very different form and very wobbly balance compared to most circus artists and so on, since they don't have a specificity to their technique, but they get the feeling rather fast just because of having all these other kind of relevant movements connecting to that very specific context. So yeah, I think it's there's certainly something there. And of course, I mean, just like building up all this, like when thinking about learning it from more kind of a standardized perspective, such as we're trying to do with like Push Harder and so on, like it's definitely the one with a largest variance in terms of how long it'll take people, because it's just so difficult to both as a teacher convey what you need to be feeling, like making sure that the setups are good enough in terms of like not sabotaging yourself as you go for the one arm, etc., etc., etc. There's just so many of these things, and then on top of that, it's just like you're literally, as you say, you're throwing people into a thing where they have no frame of reference for what it's supposed to feel like.
Yeah, exactly. It's just I really like that analogy of the abyss. It's like you go into the abyss and you climb your way out. But then it's like once you get to the point of like, there's an interesting click point I've noticed with a lot of the people over the last couple of years, that I think up until about the 8 to 10 second mark, a lot of people can just balance, but they're not actually really balancing. They're just surviving. And then something happens. And it can happen overnight. Like I've seen it in a couple of people. It's just like literally, it's like look at their form checks, and then a day later they're like, look at this, and they're just like they all say the same thing. I felt in control. I could balance it, and it's just like before they were just surviving, and then whatever balance reactive capacity works out, then suddenly they're like, oh, the body can do it. Same way like when the light bulb moment you get when you go, oh, I squeeze my fingertips, it stops me falling over into overbalance in a handstand. Well, then it's the same kind of thing, but it's just much more complicated.
Yeah, like I think I definitely know what you mean there. Like the only big issue with the one arm is that neither the student nor the teacher will be able to analyze and detail those things, because like in a two arm handstand is rather simple to see in terms of the wave of balance. It's just like you see someone, they stand for a while, they start getting tired, you see the shoulders sink a bit, the weight moves a bit forward, you see the fingers really digging into the ground to not fall forwards. Either they squeeze too hard and they drop back to the feet, or they can't squeeze hard enough and they fall forwards, for example. While on the one arm, it's just like there's so many things happening per second that like it's really hard to know. Like I remember when I was teaching in circus school in Copenhagen, and I was working with people that did one arms all day during their classes, and you just look at them and you're like, okay, why did he fall now? And very often it's not even relevant why the person fell, but like you kind of just like look through the chain of what happened. Of course, usually it's just because the shoulder destabilizes, and that just like sends a like an enormous cascading effect through the entire body. But it's just like to be able to notice like why it goes there, and for the person to sense that, or like I have this one video on my phone where like I'm filming from below the canes. So I'm doing a one arm on the cane, and I do the jump switch on the cane, and it goes in slow, like it's slow motion video, and you see the way my body reacts because the jump isn't great. So like I pike the hips a lot towards kind of like a one arm press kind of position, and then I flick my arm over to the side in this really weird position. And when you see it in slow motion, it just, you see how much stuff is going on. But when you see it fast, you just see this kind of twitch of the arm and the legs, and then the rest of it is fine, kind of. And I have no way of detailing that specific process of all the things that happen during that motion, where like in practice what I did was that like I landed on that one arm and I corrected the mistake. That is like the only experience that I had, kind of.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Just I've done some maths on it recently. Now I'm going to say some numbers now. I don't want people quoting me because I'm not certain on the maths. But I think I worked it out that there's 720 unique ways you can lose balance in a one-arm handstand. And there's about 12 unique ways you can lose balance in a two-arm handstand.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I've done a bit of a matrix on it, Tessa. I think it's off slightly, but I think it's fairly close. Mm-hmm. So you're just like, if you think about just, you know, I can, in a two-arm handstand, I can teach you all those things in a class format. If we just think of the very basic ones, okay, over and under balance. And then we have over and under balance where you either pike at the hips or lose the back. And then you have shoulders open or closed. You know, there's a few more like lateral as well. But that's so you can set up a drill for each one of them and teach someone.
Things,
and then people get a familiarity in a controlled way. But then in the one arm, it's like, well, you've went off diagonally towards the little finger. At the same time, you've lost your flag, and your bottom leg is counter-rotated towards the underbalance direction.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's just one thing. And that will happen for a quarter of a second. And then you'll go in the opposite direction. And it's, I remember counting rebalances per second on one arm just to see the difference. And like, say, even on, you know, you look at normal people are pretty good at handstands. They might do one correction a second while they're pretty fresh on a two arm. Whereas even on you, I counted on you actually one time, and you were doing 5 to 10 corrections a second on your like completely stable.
Yeah, that's about like the kind of, I've never like thought of it like specifically in terms of maths like that, but that's kind of like intuitively that what I think that I do kind of per second, like between 5 and 10. And like, funny thing is that like the better you are, almost the more of them you do, and hence it seems that you stay more still. So like you're kind of almost more active, but it's just you're active in such a small space, like just such a small kind of little circle of balance that you allow everything to happen. And like and that kind of it brings me into like, if we're like talking about kind of the strength of the one arm handstand, and that is something that I think is very underestimated, and it's very annoying to speak about strength in acrobatic practices and circus and so on, because like there is this tendency to think that strength is kind of the opposing thing of technique. Either you do it on strength or you do it on technique. I think this is like a very misleading and like a nonsensical kind of dichotomy, because like it's like technique is a specific way of doing something, and that is it uses strength. And like the assumption is further like exacerbated by the fact that like people look at big dude from gym who can't stand very well on hands, and then they see like slim girl stands on one arm perfectly, and they think, oh, she has good technique, he has lots of strength, hence technique is better than strength. While this isn't the case. Like, as I've mentioned this several times before, but I look upon strength as like the ability to exert force, or like exert in handstand control then in any specific context. And like all of those then quote unquote like slim girls who do one arms, they're really damn strong. They're just very strong in that context they're working. And like big muscle size, yes, it like cross section of tissue does has something to say about strength, but like when you're doing handstands, if you're carrying a light body, you don't need to build as much mass as if you're carrying a very heavy body. So like there's all these things that go into just creating this dumb misunderstanding. And like the funny thing there is that like you need a lot of strength to balance the one arm, but that strength is ultra specific. And that idea go on.
Sorry, go on. There's a very classic shape to the back of a hand balancer.
Yes, always.
That you'll see. Yeah, you'll see it in general. It's like if you look at the silhouette of a hand balancer in circus, once you see like professional people, like they all tend towards having the same kind of upper back development. There's not a lot of upper traps. The mid back is kind of thick, and there's a bit of a hump if you look at them at the side. The rear delts are quite well developed. All these kind of things, and it's quite like it's universal across like the girls as well as the guys, and even the sizes. It's just like if you scale someone up to your height versus say someone who's like 150 centimeters 5 foot, then they just have the same kind of build that is proportionally smaller. It's interesting.
You like there isn't that much arms usually on hand balancers, like unless they would develop them otherwise, like with specific
doing straps,
straps or planche work and all that. But like, and what I find interesting there is like also in terms of the balance, that the way that, because like I think that one of the most common assumptions I hear from people that don't have a lot of experience training one arm is like, I think I'm strong enough for it, I just don't understand how to balance yet. And that to me is a very like good indicator that the person doesn't really understand what they're dealing with yet, because like when you are strong enough for it, you balance it because you then are able to exert the right amount of force at the right places. And like you said, like with the amount of corrections per second, like first of all, you're balancing a object in all 3 dimensions, and it's rotating and doing all these weird things at once, which means that the corrections need to be fast. And I mean, fast twitch is literally more kind of like quote unquote strength demanding than just this very slow kind of like mellow pressure. There is no mellow pressure in the beginning for someone learning a one arm. And like you over time you will get better at it, which means you'll be using like de facto less strength per second. But in the beginning, you just need to develop that up to a level where you can calm it more down. And like interestingly enough, like for me experiencing when I do a one arm, like of course I can't feel my separate rotator cuff muscles firing, but like that entire complex of that's like around the ball of the humerus is working so hard and so much per second to kind of finely tune and keep that ball of the humerus exactly where it should be. So it's just such a misunderstanding when you go up against the wall and you hold your weight for a while and you think, okay, strength is there, I got it, I can stand on one arm against the wall for a minute, but like then you put it into where the body needs to rebalance using specific strength that you've never even tried. So how are you expecting to be able to do it?
I think it's this mistake. There's a mistake that a lot of coaches across the fitness world, they misinterpret rigidity and fixation with stability. And if you look at, say, stability, any kind of joint stability, it's an almost reactive capacity that is involved around like neuromuscular control, being able to absorb, restore, and reconcile force in a particular generation to keep your planes working. So it's very, can be very fast in sporting contexts. And then a lot of people think, oh yeah, if I really squeeze my knee, everything on the either side of my knee really super hard so the knee tracks forward and backwards, then the knee is stable. It's like, well, no, it's not really stable because it's not really reacting to something outside itself. And it's the same with the one arm holds when people are doing one arm holds, which are a necessary step for some people, and you're going to build some conditioning somehow. But they're replacing this fully locked, pure, almost isometric contraction with a contraction. If you ever get the privilege of training with a kind of very high level hand balancer, and you can look at their back when it's going. It's rippling and vibrating. All the muscles are kind of like twitching on and off, as Mikael was saying.
Fucking Morse code on the back.
Yeah, exactly. You can see this going on, and it's a very different motor capacity than just being able to hold something squeezed and rigid. So it's this kind of thing is what you're looking for. You're looking like I always like to call my things poetic stuff to my students to keep them amused, and I call it stone turns to bamboo. So you get the idea of being like rigid. So we built the rigid strength, and then we have to put you into the condition where the stone can bend, I suppose. But this idea, it's it's complicated.
And like I think also there is a level of kind of, whereas in the normal handstand, like you're basically all on kind of quote unquote on top of your shoulders all the time. So it's like delts and traps and all that, and of course the entire like area there's working, but like on the one arm, like kind of the entire thing in terms of the lats and kind of the obliques, the serratus anterior, and like all of that stuff will be involved on an early level as well, since like the two general directions you'll be able to control in a one arm is kind of what I call inwards and outwards, like whereas like inwards then would be if you're standing on one arm and you drop towards your other hands, you land on two arms, kind of falling that direction, and then it's falling outwards, which is when you fall into kind of a deep flag or so on. And the more you flag, of course, like the more kind of oblique heavy and kind of your sides will get into it. So that entire area is suddenly also necessary to work on. And I mean, that's also why we teach the kind of the cartwheels to handstand and side flexions and all these things, so that you have, like, your body needs to have a frame of reference for what the hell is going on in the lateral dimension of the body. And
it's one of those things actually you just touched on there, just to cycle back slightly. It's with the shoulder positioning in the one arm, one of the things we're actually really looking for is that the shoulder position doesn't change. Whereas like in a two arm, it's like, you can open, you can close the shoulders, you can restore it. If you over open the shoulders, or if you close them like to the planche direction, you're dead.
Yeah, it's over. Rip.
So all the balance has to like come from the waist and the legs, essentially, or all the big swings and corrections. Not the
bigger swings needs to happen from there. But it's kind of the, and also what you said, like in terms of the shoulder positioning, like since you're getting, like, of course you're getting twice the amount of weight on it and all that instability and stuff that you need to handle, and like in terms of then the kind of the outwards falling towards the flag direction, if you have nothing out there, if you have nothing but like of strength below the point where you're trying to hold kind of your side flex, like let's say you set up your one arm, you shift in the side, so you pull the leg slightly towards the floor with kind of the flag direction, you push on the shoulder, you get in fingertips, and if your leg then is at the lowest point your body's able to hold it, and you then let go and start balancing, and that leg drops by 0.5 centimeter, it's over. Like, you need to have something on deeper level than that. And I mean, that doesn't mean you should be like balancing by just waving your legs around all the way, but like you need to just ensure that you have something around the area that you're trying to work in. And like that's also something in terms of the side work that like we speak about and push harder, like the fact that like we call kind of the side flexion weight shifting, we call that for flagging, which is like, it's, I think it could be something that's easily misunderstood by thinking that like one arm is just flagging a lot. No, it isn't, but it is like the side flexing motion is exactly what you do when you flag, and if you just continue that motion, you end up in a flag. But the issue is if you don't do it, you're going to shift your shoulder laterally instead, and then you end up in a total clusterfuck of rotation and too much inwards balance, which is really hard for beginners to learn. And I guess that's also that's the main mistake that most beginners that don't know how to train do. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, I think it's good just to touch on what we've done and push harder. Is I'm really happy with this approach we kind of collated between our experience, or we broke the one arm, but then as obviously you build up the conditioning. But when you're going for it, it's a segmented approach where we're going to flag. That sets the hips at a diagonal angle, which you need. That also gives you radar for when your balance point is. Then you shift the weight into the hand, and now your side is compressed down. Your spine will be in a C shape. This is very diagnostic. If the person can get that C-shaped curve from the lumbar spine and from the right bit of the spine as well, it means that the hips are doing the right correction. So we're looking for the curve to initiate from just above the rib cage when the thoracolumbar junction, and not at the top. And then once you have that, then the side is bent on the onside. And what we're looking for is when we engage the push, the side straightens out and the spine begins to straighten out in response to this. So then we end up with an almost straight spine position.
Yeah, except it's diagonal.
Except it's diagonal. It kind of sets everything up from like, I always think of it as like we're loading the springs, and then the springs have something to work against. Whereas if you just shift the shoulders over, you don't actually load the springs in a way that actually gets the weight into the verticality we need.
Yeah. And I remember like when we started discussing about how to set up the push hard program and like depending like, or looking at kind of the general mistakes we've both seen and stuff. And like, because I've heard people ask me about this, like why do you shift the hips first and then push? Like, why don't you do it at the same time? In most circus school and most teachers I've met, they teach you shift the hips and you push in the shoulder at the same time, which, yes, it makes sense. But from my experience teaching and doing, if you try to do two elements at the same time, you're going to have a harder time than if you do one and one element while learning. Like most people that are experienced will very easily shift and do this like nicely and properly at the same time, but making the assumption that it's easier because the professionals do that isn't necessarily correct. They can do that because they are very experienced on the hands. I do that too. Like, it's not a necessity to shift one and one, but while learning, you can then set up your hips, you shift the hips correctly, you know where they are, you stop the movement, you have control, and then you initiate the push with the shoulders. You can concentrate on one thing. That's kind of the logic behind doing that, so that as you do this push with the shoulder, since we also talk in the program about like how you keep the free arm, like the assistance arm shoulder, you want to keep that shrugged so that you don't move the free scapula and so on, which is another topic of discussion. But like then you can concentrate on that specifically rather than trying to implement all these parts. Then over time, as you get comfortable, yes, then you implement them all. But it's, again, the idea that we kind of is more or less the foundational part of the entire handstand factory thing is like, first you remove the variables so that you can understand each component, and then you start adding them back together again.
Yeah, it's always this idea of like, particularly when learning, it's like when you're learning something, it's not the same as the practice of something. So then you have to have more steps and you have to have more ways of breaking it down. It also becomes like, it's your roadmap. Like if you flag over and you're rotating into the flag, you go, okay, I've done something weird in the hips and the legs, I can control that. Whereas if I flag when I engage my push, that means I probably not pushed directly vertical into the ground, but I've actually pushed up and back, and that's caused the rotation. It's the same. Whereas if I was to do the two of them at once, it's like, oh, was it my hips going, or was it my up and back push that caused me to rotate? And by doing it in this kind of thing, you get a bit of you begin to understand like, oh, I can flag okay, but then when I push, I lose it. Okay, my push is what's causing the rotation. Oh, I flag over and I fall straight out. Okay, it's my flag is something's off. So it gives you an almost diagnostic on your own skill level and how to approach it.
Yeah, and I think it's it kind of follows the same type of logic as, for example, the use of like you can basically kind of break it down into, okay, I can stand on my hands. I can stand on my hands in straddle. I can do a weight shift, flagging my legs into the position I want. Can I stay there? Yes, no. If no, oh, shit happens. You fell. But if you're able to stay there, you know, okay, I can control this position. I know where it is. I know how it works. Then it means that you can get yourself at least there most of the times you practice. And then from there, you practice pushing, you try to get into the fingertip support, and then you work on that part. And then, of course, that's going to take you a while until you get it. You learn the fingertips, then you move on to straight arm support, so that like each part of this you can practice separately, and then you basically just add another Lego block to the puzzle as you get better at it. And I think this is a very important part also for learning like the actual one arm balance. Like we're using the straight arm support kind of setup for it, which like there's some people that employ the kind of go to fingertips and remove fingers from there until you're on one finger and so on, which is, I mean, fair enough. It can work. Reason I think that straight arm support is, or why I prefer it, is that in straight arm support you need to practice another coordination from fingertips, and as you do so, you move the elbow out to the straight arm support position, which is very similar to the actual one arm position. And you get to that point and you touch the fingers. You actually get to an easier point than the one arm, but you get to the point that's as similar to the one arm as you can kind of possibly recreate with just the floor and your hand. So it's I think it's a kind of like, because if you remove the last finger from a kind of 5-finger support, and you remove the last finger and you then straighten your arm out, that means that like you need to make a coordination in a one-arm handstand, which is moving your elbow, which for a beginner will send you spiraling to your doom. So it can work, but I think that like just setting up in straight arm support, you can work on just, you get there, you get really damn strong in straight arm support, and then you will work on slowly just letting go with the fingers until you can actually get some sort of sensation there without too much disturbance.
On the removing fingers method, now obviously I'm open to be corrected, I've never actually seen anyone have success with that method who wasn't working with a coach as well and getting spotted. Like I've seen like some circus coaches who do use that, but then the people they're training they'll be having classes with this person, will be getting heavily spotted in the circus coaching kind of manner. And then they'll be doing that. That will be what they'll told to do in like their conditioning between sets, or when they're training on days by themselves.
I've seen some people learn through that, and I mean, I guess just mathematically speaking, enough time there, and it'll work.
Yeah, no, I just never seen anyone have success with it. It's one of those ones. Whereas people with straight arm support, like I've seen enough people now at this stage with that kind of go. It's kind of the interesting point of view of just, it's like so much corrections. You can still, like when you're still on 4 fingers, even 2 fingers and 3 fingers, you can still provide a lot of like corrections with that hand to the balance. Yeah. Whereas with straight arm support, because you're on the edge of the fingers, you just can't do anything useful. It's just like support and not actual support and control. Yeah,
exactly. And the fact that like when your fingers are still kind of, because like you're on 2 hands, then you move to 5 fingers, your base of support is the same. It hasn't changed even in size. It's just like where the most amount of weight is, but like the base of support is the same. And of course, if there's 1 finger there, the base of support is smaller, but it's still being supported from the same place. And like it becomes kind of as if you have a like that kind of base then it's very centered under you still, while if you go to a straight arm support and you would draw a triangle from your hand until that point where the straight arm support fingers are touching the floor, then it will be a very narrow triangle, which means that the amount of force you can exert on the floor is very low out there, and it does provide you with something, because like a one-arm handstand is way, way harder than a straight arm support hold, but at least you can get yourself to a very, like, the proximity is as close as you can get. And the really nice fact about it is that like as you start, like the fingers start becoming very light in a straight arm support, and your hip position is set up well and your shoulder is good, like the fingers can kind of start to just float off, rather than, you don't need to pick up anything. Like if you like if your setup is good in straight arm support and you let the fingers kind of wither away and die there, you'll be able to stand on one arm, simply because like you're not adding any variables to this like very precarious balance at the moment of truth, kind of like the last part, which is so hard and you're so stoked and stressed and like all of that stuff as you're starting to get this the first time. And then like if you add something there for a beginner, like you fly off. So it's kind of trying to avoid that. That is the point of it.
And I have to say, that's a whole, the cue of just let the weight die in the hand is something I stole off you and implemented very successfully over the last few years. But just like, so I'd coach people, what I would normally do in that coaching situation, which works, is get people to set up, get them very light on the fingertips. If I was there in person, I'd be looking for their fingernails to stop being white. And then I'd just cue them, okay, flag more, pull the leg down, flag more, and then just use the hand to come up a bit. Whereas just letting the weight die and just push until it just takes the power out of the hand. And then it just like, then you just end up in a very nice balance hover where you're like a centimeter, half a centimeter off the ground. And then panic ensues because you're actually balancing.
Yeah.
But it's then chaos into the abyss, off you go. And but that idea of just letting the weight die instead of doing anything at the moment of balance was it's definitely one of those game changer cues I picked up off you over the last while. It's just like, okay, that really helped a lot of people. So
yeah, it's
good work, Mikael.
It's like I largely started to like that thing, of course, like my old coach Sasha, like he uses the straight arm support thing, and that's kind of where I took that off of course. But what I started to kind of analyze with this is exactly that, the kind of the idea of don't pick up your hand. Like if you need to lift the hand from the floor, that means there's weight on it. If there's weight on it, you're going to fall. Like means that like your center isn't over your balancing arm, and you need to get it there. And that's kind of where this like patience thing comes in. And also because like you need an enormous amount of tries just to get strong enough at correcting. You need to do an enormous amount of tries just to like get any kind of awareness and sensation of where the hell you are, and an enormous amount of tries where you do this dumb mistake. You pick up the hand again and again and again, and you fall. And that is like one point where I think it's very important to to have the right mindset when you go there. It's just like, okay, the goal is to do a straight arm support with really light fingers and let it happen. If it happens, it means you've done a good job at the other things, and it'll be very short at first. And like there's this one there's this one thing that I've noticed, like kind of the very, very last point for a person to do before they can do a one arm, if they do it through this setup, is like this is the ultimate. So if you're able to do a straight arm support, really light fingers, they come off for a fraction of a second almost by quote unquote mistake. The fingers tap back on the floor, float off, tap back on the floor, float off. This kind of tapping on the floor, it can only happen if the balance shoulder is solid. Like you'll see that like the hips will be in place, the shoulder will be in place, and the fingers will tap there, but that tapping won't send the person flying out. And that's because there's so minimal amount of weight left on that finger. Whereas you see people that like, they're not fully there, they pick up the hand and they try to tap, but the picking up sent them flying, the tapping sent them even more flying, and it's just over. So like the last point is like being able to do those taps and then like a few times and then come back to two arms as if nothing happened. Like that is kind of like a very good kind of diagnostic on whether or not you did a good job. And like actually for any level in this kind of side flexion to one arm syllabus, like let's say it's even like you're learning this to weight shift to some degree or other. So you flag over to the side, and if when returning to two arms, if that makes you need to bend your arms or go into a press or whatever it is, as you return to two arms, it means you lost your shoulder at some point in the movement. Same for fingertips. You're able to set up a good fingertips. if that's solid, are you able to return to 2 arms? And if you are, did you have to like basically like invade Stalingrad to be able to fucking catch the balance, or could you just like place the hand neatly on the floor as if nothing happened? Like being able to use that as kind of a diagnostic for whether or not you had good shoulder position in the balance, and then returning to 2 arm is like just something that I've noticed to be kind of these like in between steps, these kind of like teeny weeny things where you can see like actual progress.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those ones I've noticed the transition from flat palm to fingertips, just before going straight arm support or anything. It should just be, you should be able to alternate them up and down very easy. If your shoulder and hips are placed well, then it doesn't really matter if you're on fingertips or if you're on the palm is flat. You can just kind of lift it up and down, and it doesn't really change anything in the balance. And that's something to watch out for, I think, or something I've noticed as well along the same lines. So I'd like to segue actually into an interesting one of shoulder position. And is there one true universal shoulder position for the one-arm handstand?
Ah, good question.
Yeah.
Like it's funny with that. I remember a friend of mine. He wrote me once. Someone had told him, "Your head isn't in the right place for a one arm. That's why you fall." And he like, the guy can't stand on one arm actually. So he asked me, he's like, "Yeah, well, what do you think about head position?" He said, like in terms of like having the ear by the shoulder and so on. I'm like,
Yeah.
Then like as I always do, and people ask me about that, I look for a video of Andre Muraru that doesn't have his arm by the head, like, or I mean, it's close to the head, but it's not glued to the head in any way, and he's the best. So then again, as we've talked about before, if you can find variations among the best people, then it must be an option and not a given. And I think that like this is one of the ones that I see the most kind of confused. That like, of course, you need an elevated shoulder, but like it'll be depending on kind of the like whether or not you have hyperextension in the in the elbow. Like that can allow you to place the arm closer to the head and so on. And preference. I mean, it's good to have it like not like a massive distance, but it's largely up to whether you feel good there and if you can balance well.
I think it's one of those things that a lot of people confuse the concept of push, which basically means you sink your weight into the arm and then you apply an equal amount of weight or possibly slightly greater to elevate your body up, so you're controlling the vertical displacement of the center of mass, which no one really talks about a lot. That's pushing. Once you're in control of your verticality, then the height is optional. And one of the things I see a lot, which I really don't like, it's one of those things, particularly if you're a coach, you really need to assess the people you're training and see if they are hypermobile or not. Because if you are looking at particularly the less muscular girls who are hypermobile, you'll see the cue to elevate. Then if you look at the scapula, like their scapula is almost like completely disconnected from their torso in terms of just how elevated it's gotten. And you're like, well, if we're putting all the subscap and all these kind of smaller muscles on the back under stretch, are they actually still able to do their job as efficiently as they were in their mid-range? So it's one of these things. It's like, yes, get your shoulder up. How high you get it up is optional. If the head, and the other one, just go back to the head, like a lot of people, like your shoulder must touch your ear. But then I went through some coach who recommends this kind of technique just to have a look at what his students look like and how it is. And himself, just don't want to name names because it sounds like I'm throwing shit. I'm not. It's just a critique. But if you look at his line, his spine and his neck is basically straight in this position. He has a hyperextended elbow quite to a big degree, and it maintains that he has a completely straight spine. But if you look at some of his students, then there's a significant degree of lateral flexion of the neck to get the ear and the shoulder connected.
Yeah, when you kind of like shift the head towards the arm, right?
Yeah, because it's not like the shoulders aren't elevating, but they just can't. Whatever, limb length or whatever, it's like, okay, the shoulder's elevated, they're high, they're in control, they're doing the drills right, but then to get the position, they have to kind of like nod and a wink to the side.
That's what happens to me. Like I have rather wide shoulders, and like if I push my shoulder to the absolute max, like I will either like my arm will start to, or like either if my arm is going to stay in a position where I have solid control, I will need to keep my head slightly away, or I'll need to like shove my head towards the arm, or worse, shove my arm towards the head. And then like I'm not creating a place where I can concentrate on balancing well. So it's very up to individual structures, and I'm sure that like the things we've talked about before in terms of individual variation of bones and muscle insertions and all these things, which will likely come up in a different episode as well. But these things are likely like contributors to how all of these things will be preferable for certain people. And again, it's a bit this this thing that like since a lot of the best people within this, I mean, you see a lot of them from sport acrobatics or from like like Ukraine circus schools or Chinese circus schools and so on. And like very often, it seems to me at least, like there is certain preferences either from the coaches or just people. Like, of course, there are certain body types and all these things that are like on average, like quote unquote, better for reaching kind of the 0.01 level of the craziest.
Yeah, it's like if you have a 7-foot wingspan on your hands, you're going to be a good basketballer. Or likely to be better than someone else.
Exactly. So I think that it's easy to compare with those and think that like you need to do like them, but that's again why I mentioned Andre, that like he doesn't have the conventionally perfect hand balancing body, and yet he's of like absolute crazy level. So it's really about figuring out then like, okay, so what works for you, and rather than thinking that like it needs to be like these other people, I think it can be such a roadblock, simply because you also add like it can be really destructive, this thing. I mean, the federation and all that stuff where where you just imagine that you unless you do like the person on the internet, then it's worthless. So it's and then like getting back to shoulder position and the digression here, but I think like you say, the push, for me at least, when I do things, the only time I push to my absolute max is when I do a figa one arm and I close my legs together. Then I need to push to my maximal range. I'm sure some people, or I know people that don't even push to max when they do that, because they have a body that complies a lot better with that position. Imogen Hustle, I'm looking at you. She can basically figa and just like slap her legs like so far down without any effort whatsoever, so her legs are vertical. And it's not an issue. It's not that big of a kind of an effort position for her whatsoever. But like in those kind of positions, yes, then you need to push more than you would need to do in a straddle. So there are levels, but you want to find that kind of like the push you need for a straddle one-arm handstand. That needs to be your baseline of push. That's kind of, that's your resting push in a sense. Like you don't want to go higher, you don't want to go lower just for the sake of it. You can go higher, you can go lower, so that you can save and control and transition and so on. But like it should be a place where you feel like you have a wide base of control, kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the degree of push, the way I coach it anyway, is set via the straight arm support method. Because what happens is you're not pushing enough with the shoulder when you set up on your flag and you shifted the weight and you're beginning to push, and if there's still weight in the hand, if your placement's all good, let's assume perfect setup. So as you push the shoulder up and straighten the side out, and as I describe it to people, the push originates down from the obliques. We're not just pushing from the shoulders. I'm pushing like everything from like lats and all are involved in some way. And obviously they're not involved in a contracted manner, but they're still, that's the imagery we're working with. And this push and that elevation, by the time the weight comes out of the hand, you've achieved by definition the degree of push you need for the one arm. So you don't need to set the shoulders up super high. You might need super high shoulders to one arm. That's, your position. This is the thing we're always looking for. What is your body's preferred position to do this in? And then we try okay, what's the minimum amount of push we require? How much over push do we need to have a zone of control on either side, both down and up? And then do we need any more than that? Well, not really. So it's this interesting idea that we can actually establish like a radar using the setup we say. Like how high do I need to actually elevate, and how far and what degree of push do I need to get there?
Like I think the like this that we mentioned before in terms of like how much you need to flex your sides to be able to get into a comfy one arm position, you will see that like most hand balancers will have like the hip will be diagonal. So the less diagonal it is, the more towards a 2-arm handstand it will rest, the higher the push you will need to be able to balance it, like comparatively. That is why, like I mentioned, legs together FIGA, that is kind of the extreme expression of that, where like a lot of weight is on the inside of your arms. The hip is counterbalancing on the outside, and you're like pushing your arm underneath that structure, and then you need to go very high. But like if you do a one arm where the hips are like identical to a normal 2-arm straddle, it's possible. It's just more difficult, and like it's much more precarious in terms of balance than like a more diagonal straddle. But you need more push in that position to be able to hold it, and kind of to do that you need to kind of squeeze together your obliques on the other side, kind of the inside, to be able to maintain that hip position. But it's very it's kind of a linear degree there on how much you need to push to be able to bring your legs towards a 2-arm position and then towards FIGA, compared to like how much weight there is inside. You need to kind of push more there. It's very, you feel that very, very well when you transition from kind of a straddle one arm and into one of those kind of inside positions.
Yeah, definitely getting that. Almost an hour. I suppose we've got one more topic.
Yeah, there's one more thing that I was thinking about in one arms that I wanted to mention. Flexibility. Yes, very important. Emmet Lewis. Like just that is also like a huge thing in terms of like how much work you'll need to put in on learning one arm. Sure, you can learn a one arm with a little degree of straddle earlier, but it's
should do a shout out to Coach DZ here in this one.
Oh yeah, because I was actually thinking about him because he learned it with like not that much of a straddle. It's actually pretty impressive.
He's got like a 10-second Swechka now.
Oh wow.
He sent me a video on Instagram recently, so shout out for that. It's just
not
like,
very bad, man.
Not very bad for the amount of time he's been training.
You get half a clap, Zen style. What was I supposed to say? Yeah, it's also interesting. Like it's one of the kind of conceptions I meet a lot with people that are training one arm. They will always tell me the same thing. Oh, but I feel so much more stable when I do the legs together setup. And I'm like, have you ever stood on one arm? No. I knew you hadn't, because you think the legs together setup feels quote unquote better. It's because you're on fingertips. Yes, it feels easier to do then because you just need to like glue your legs together, shift over to the side, get the fingertips. But balancing that fucking thing, it's a nightmare. Like you're not ready. You think you're ready, but you're not. Like it's basically like your straddle one arm is a tiny little boat, and you want to take it out on the big seas. No, you don't. You need to have a ship first. So it's just such a classic tendency to think that like the legs together is easier. But like the wider the straddle is, the on average faster you will learn it. So that's not saying that like legs together drills are useless, but like in terms of actually developing the reactive capacity, the legs together will provide you with two large challenges, because the reactions you need to make are too fast on average for the beginner. So stretch.
I think it's one of these torque ones as well. One of the ways I like to think about it is that if we have the legs out, obviously there's a lower center of mass, but your legs, if they're turning and rotating, they give you much more sensation to the middle of the body, so you can really feel the leverage of the leg coming in and out of position. Whereas when you have the legs together, then the deviation from the center line is much smaller, so you just haven't got the precision balance capacity. You just don't feel it go as early. So you imagine like okay, you drop 10 degrees of hip position in straight. it's not going to look a lot visually. Whereas if you drop 10 degrees with the leg out to the side, you have a much bigger, because the leg will go, you can see that there's a bigger change.
Yeah.
You can feel it as well. So it's the legs, they work kind of like the old tightrope walkers with the sticks, and they use them for balance.
100%.
They work like that, but they also just work in terms of radars that they give you a better sense. The other thing is they also, when you're learning to balance, like particularly when you've jumped off the abyss and you're trying to balance, you are basically going to use every single joint segment you can to balance. And if you have your legs out, that means you have both your knees and they're free to move. Your legs can move together, like transverse abduction or abduction. They can move up and down. They can move independent of each other. So you have a lot of options for the body to try and flail around and survive on one arm. Whereas when you have the legs together, you suddenly, okay, I've got no knees, I've got no abduction.
Just have a fucking shoulder.
Yeah, just have a shoulder and a hand and a hope, a prayer, and a Bon Jovi
yeah,
song.
and we have loads of prayers. But it's what was I supposed to say? Yeah, like that's also just like the last thing that I wanted to just mention, which I'm sure that like if we didn't mention it, someone would ask us to mention it, and that is the fucking twisting. And that is just
we
like
have a whole episode on twisting.
Yeah, like we shouldn't really do a whole episode on twisting, but like it's and that's also why people feel that, oh yeah, but like legs together feels easier because I don't need to twist. No, but like try letting go of the hand and you twist immediately and it's over. You cannot control twisting very well in the legs together, and this is why that if you see a good hand balancer make a mess in the legs together one arm, the first thing they'll do is to open their legs and catch and replace their shoulder and then close their legs again. Like if you see like I've done some like legs together saves sometimes and they look super duper rough. Like it's terrible.
I've seen you do some of those saves.
Yeah, it's not very comfortable to do because like you need to muscle it so much in the shoulder, and it's doable. It just takes a lot more out of you. So it feels like you're not twisting on legs together, but again, it's because you haven't let go yet. And the twisting in a straddle, it's counterintuitive, but like the fact that the legs are long, it just makes that it means that the pivot points are or like the end of your legs are far away, which means that it'll rotate slow. Like it's just like a like any wheel, like the outer points will rotate slower, so that like that gives you more time to react. I'm sad to bring it to you like that, but it's true. It feels really miserable with twisting on one arm because you feel you can do nothing about it in the beginning, and yeah, that's how it is. You can't do anything about it until you've been in the situation for long enough for your body to get both the strength and the understanding of trying to survive up there. And like as we've talked about before, like balancing a one arm in the start feels like falling slow. So you need to have this mindset. You need to have the kind of idea that you're going to stay up. You're going to fight the forces here and resist what is going on, so that you can eventually build this motor control and understanding. But to just break down a little bit what the twisting actually is in terms of the mechanics, most of the time the twisting can come just purely from the hip if you do a bad job at setting it up. But most of the time, like twisting will occur when you go to fingertips or when you go to straight arm support or when you go to one arm, kind of those transition points. And what happens is that like as you do that transition, there's a slight destabilization of your shoulder, which means you can't keep it as small of a point in your hand, which means that like that little movement in the shoulder, most of the time, if you did that same movement on two arms, it would make you arch. But since you are on like you're placing the weight over one point and your legs are apart, like it won't express as arching. It will express as the top leg rotating backwards most of the time. Front leg low leg rotates forwards and it just sends you into this like slow spiral out of control. So
yeah, for those who know about anatomy, if you think about that one, if you think of the fiber direction of the lats and the glutes across the body in that X shape, it's basically what's going on. Instead of arching, which would be the two-arm version of that, it's shortening along that whole chain, and that pulls the leg up and over the top.
Yeah, so it's it's very often just like it's like the twisting is a consequence, and like more often than it is kind of a cause in itself that you did something wrong there. Like, and believe me, everyone twists all the time. It's just the better the hand, or like the more experienced the hand balancer and the better they're doing, the less you will see of it. While if any hand balancer goes to a one arm and then like starts relaxing and starts doing nothing for like half a second, they will twist, and then they'll have to do like a quick and violent correction to get back on it. While if you're tight at it, you're controlling these things constantly. And you'll also see with a lot of hand balancers that like if they kind of almost fall and they kind of go into a deep kind of flaggy thing, and then you'll also see the hips starting to twist, but they'll be in control because they do have the abilities then to replace themselves and to catch it. So it's a very complicated procedure and loads of things going on at the same time. But like as my first coach said to me, I asked him about like how do I deal with twisting? He just said deal with it. Like it's just like over time you just need to like I can't tell you how to handle the twisting. It's just it's too fast. It needs to be on the intuitive spectrum kind of, and it just takes loads of practice.
Yeah, my only advice I give to people on twisting is try to over twist in the opposite direction. There's some walking drills and stuff we have in the program which definitely help in it.
Yeah,
the main bit is just
for sure useful.
Twisting, just twist out the opposite direction, fall out the opposite direction, and force yourself to, and that just gives you an idea of like the over and under side, and gives the body something to work with. But yeah, twist, it sucks, and the
orientation. It's
spatial awareness. Can you do it, brah?
Yeah, right. But that's quite a lot of stuff about the one arm, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones, like particularly if we were to start getting into specific positions and
all these ones. Yeah, we didn't even really speak about like the free shoulder. Didn't speak about like lifting the arm. Didn't speak about like there's many things that we didn't like.
The three different shoulder positions of one arm. We kind of touched on a bit. I have three that I coach people. There's like we have the standard one. We use a straddle one arm, straight, diamonds, all these. That's one position. Then we have the flag and the full flag position, which I use a different shoulder position with. And Figa, as you said, the higher shoulder position.
Well. I usually use 4 because like the press positions are slightly different to flags. Like they're very similar, but at a certain point it changes. But yeah, it's like the differences there are even more subtle really than anything on 2 arms. So it's like it's not like it's not like they're totally different beasts, but they definitely have their specificities, and they matter a lot more than they do on 2 arms.
Yeah, exactly. So right, I think we will. That's a taster for more one arm stuff to come in this.
Yeah, definitely.
If you are interested in learning to handstand or learn the one arm or learn everything really we do, check out our programs at handstandfactory.com that makes this podcast possible. Other than that, good night, Mikael, and good night, everyone listening.
Good night yourself.